All right, Turia, thanks for being here. I'm really excited to learn from you and get your wisdom and see what the Holy Ghost has whispered to you about homeschooling. So I'm going to start off with my first question is, why did you decide to homeschool?
That's a great question. Um, we were moving to a small town in Washington,
Hmm.
and I had my little 3-year-old son and a newborn. And I just knew that it was going to be a big option when we moved there.
Hmm.
The schools weren't a place that I was sure my son would thrive. Like we had
Hmm.
gotten him into a charter school and where we lived at the time before we moved. And I felt like, oh, my main goal as a parent is to help him keep that love of learning where he goes on his educational journey. And when we moved to this town in Washington, I knew the school struggled. I knew the town was struggling. It was a logging town that had lost a lot of mills. So I just spent 2 years researching homeschooling as an option. And because of the schooling situation, there were a lot of homeschoolers in that town. And so whenever we were at a park and there were school age kids, I would find the mom and just say, "Hey, do you homeschool?" And then I would ask questions and read lots of books. And I really just had the luxury of taking 2 years to dig deep and interview a lot of homeschooling moms. About half our
Oh.
ward homeschooled, and a lot of them had graduated kids um, as homeschoolers, so I could get a whole spectrum of those who were maybe just a year ahead of me, all the way up to I have a 25-year-old who's just finished her master's kind of situation. And so I just researched it
Hmm.
and prayed a lot and tried to watch my son. We'd enrolled him in a preschool. And I thought he would love it. Again, we worked really hard to find a good fit for him, but it wasn't a great fit.
Hmm.
And I just remember asking him after his first year, "Hey, what did you think about that?" And he's like, "I don't really want to go back." I said, "Really?" 'Cause it was just 2 days a week. "Well, why?" And he's like, "It just is so much sitting down." And so I said, "Well, do you still like going enough to go 1 day a week, or would you like to be done all together?" He's like, "No, I think 1 day a week would be good." So we tried 1 day a week. Meanwhile, I was searching more options and trying to prepare if we did pursue homeschooling. And at the end, I said, "Well, what do you think? You want to go to school? What would you like to do?" And he said, "I don't want to go back." And so that's pretty much been our approach. Is every at the end of every year we talk with all of our kids, like, "How are you feeling? What worked well? What would you like to do different? What are you passionate about? What would you like to pursue?" And we always ask, "Would you like to try public school?" And we work together
That's
to
cool.
guide their academic path or their learning path.
That's cool and that's brave too, though, because have they ever said, I want to do public school, or do you go back and
Yeah.
forth, or how does
Yeah,
that
they
work?
have said that before. Um, No one has ever gone full time.
Hmm.
They definitely do not want to do that.
Interesting.
But they've mostly my son has tried a class here and there. Like right now, he's at the high school and he
Okay,
does first period every day.
cool. I
Um,
feel like we might do some of that hybrid too. I think hybrid's really nice option.
yeah, it really
Yeah.
is. You can cherry pick
Hmm.
what's a good fit. Your kids get to try and navigate just some of the friction that can come up
Hmm.
of, working with different teaching styles. I think you can do that in a lot of different ways with co-ops and things,
Hmm.
but we've seen a lot of growth in the way our son has handled his classes at public school. And it also was really funny. His very first class he did in middle school,
Hmm.
after the first month or so, he came back and said, "I don't know how anyone learns anything there. It takes so long to get anything done. I just go for the social." I just like to
That's
go and see
interesting.
my friends. And then I don't think he even finished. Maybe he did 1/4 of that class. And then
Wow.
I think the lifestyle of homeschool is pretty inviting.
I agree.
for my kids, you
I
know.
feel like I remember in public school, I watched a lot of movies.
Yeah.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. Well, I think he took this archery class and
Uh-huh.
I think it was an entire month before anyone even got to touch a bow and arrow. And how it
Really?
happened was they would all, it was like a class of 50, they would all watch as one person would shoot 3 arrows and
Wow.
then sit down. And then it was the next person.
Wow.
And every day it was a joke. Did you get to shoot any arrows today? And he's like, no, not today. Maybe next
It
time.
was like theory of archery. That is funny. Well, that's really cool though. It sounds like you kind of just listen to your kids and follow their lead. Is that
Try
what you're
to.
thinking?
Yeah. I think we really do a lot of counsels as a family,
That's great.
individually, and try and really, it's always this balance that you're trying to find between providing opportunities that they don't know exist, because you
Hmm.
can't trust a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old to know all the things they're going to love,
Hmm.
but also, provide what does Charlotte Mason call it, a beautiful feast for
Mm.
them, and let them see what feels like they want to pursue more, and what is like, oh, I'm not really into that right now. Maybe next time, or maybe
That's cool.
never.
I love what you said about every time I hear Charlotte Mason, it's like, what else did she say?
Yes.
I just love her. And I remember she said once like children should be outside 6 hours a day at least.
Yes,
And the days that I do that, I'm like, Charlotte would approve.
she would. There is so much to learn.
Right?
And I think for me, it's been a journey of understanding that there's nothing specific we have to learn or not learn. Like if you look at the
Hmm.
history of education in our country, the history of education in our world, like the metrics change
Hmm.
constantly depending
Hmm.
on what the world needs. Like right now, coding and, you know, um, programming is really big. Like those are the must-have skills. Um, but overall, what I was hoping to encourage in my kids was being a good citizen, creative problem solving, the ability to work in a team, the ability to see the person across from them who's different as a person and someone whose opinion and voice matters, and seeing themselves as a world citizen,
Hmm.
and how to use what they know to find out what they don't know, whether that's networking with the right people and teachers and experts, whether that's saying, I don't know what 7 times 7 is, but I know what 7 times 6 is, and I can figure out what 7 times 7 is.
Mm.
Like, really someone who can take charge of their life and move forward with confidence,
Mhm.
not someone who's just like, I was really good at playing the public school game.
Me
Right?
too. Like
It
good
was just like
time.
so
Yeah.
good at like exactly what I need to do
Yep.
to
Check the
keep my,
boxes.
yep. And I was so good at it.
Yeah,
And,
that's so funny.
at the end of the day, you look at it and think, what did I really gain? What did I become through this process? There were
Mhm.
a lot of really cool things that happened.
Not love of learning for me, unfortunately. I don't know for you if you stumbled on that on the way.
There were some definite moments where, like, I was just having this conversation with my brother. I
Mhm.
remember my 10th grade teacher that taught me how to write an essay.
Mhm.
And I remember thinking, that is beautiful. I love that form. I love that balance. I love the organization. I love everything about this. Like, this is something I can really get behind.
I love
But,
that.
you know, that wasn't exactly my reaction to, say, trigonometry. So
For
it's a
anybody's
mixed bag.
probably. That's cool. Going back to your son, I feel that that's interesting that he was like, I'm sitting down too much. Is that what he said?
Yeah, those are his words.
That is so
There's
interesting.
too much sitting down time.
Wow, because I feel like there is a lot of sitting
So
down.
much.
So good for him for because I don't think I ever noticed that,
Mm-mm.
but good for him.
And for a 3-year-old
Yeah.
to recognize that. And even now, we call him our panther.
Hmm.
He paces. We do a reading basket
Hmm.
approach when we do school together.
Hmm.
And, my girls are typically watercoloring or doing pattern blocks or doing, some kind of
Hmm.
quiet, busy work. And he's pacing around the table or pacing back and forth, and he has to move. And that's fine.
Isn't that great that he can do
He
that,
can,
right?
he absolutely can.
That's so cool. Wow. I want to touch back on the world citizen thing in a little bit, but I wanted to ask you, and actually you've kind of touched on this. I like to ask how you keep your homeschool engaging, light, and fun as you go through the years?
Oof.
Positive.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think part of the answer is accepting that it's not always light and fun and engaging, that sometimes what we're learning is you just got to get it done.
I love that.
And so, I've spent so much time in math pedagogy. I had math trauma. Everyone's got something, right?
Right.
And I thought my kids are not going to have this. We are going to love math. We're going to do all the things. We're going to play math.
All
I like
manipulatives.
separated the math grammar from the math, the math exploratory. And at the end of the day, I don't think one of my children would say math is their favorite, but they will tell you we are consistent about it. They know it's not negotiable. This is a skill that you need to do every day. We do it every day. We're consistent. So part of that is accepting that it's not always fun. It's not always light. It's not always engaging. That being said, we do constant check-ins, like at the end of the school year. And I find, how does it typically work? We school year round when we're home. Typically, if we're home, we're doing school. Now, our school has our reading basket. We can typically get done in an hour. So it's definitely not an 8-hour commitment, right? Kids all summer long, my kids are still playing, they're working, they're doing things, but we're also doing school. But I find that there are different sandbars in our year. So one of those is December. Every December, we take everything off, all of the things, and we do a specific Christ-centered reading basket. And some of the things we do every single year. This is something that, again, we're always checking in. What do you like about this? What do you like about that? What would you like to do different? So the things that typically get done every single December in our reading basket is we always study the Messiah, and we have a schedule that we follow where we read a scripture and then we listen to a piece, and then we have certain articles and certain things that go with it. So there's kind of that piece that we always do. We always read the best Christmas pageant ever. We always read A Christmas Carol. And then we add in and take things out as we decide. But it's always a Christ-centered Christmas reading basket. And that is, by the time you get to the end of November, you're kind of ready for something different. So whatever we're doing, I try to tie up loose ends in November, and I'm always, I don't know, there's like the homeschool mom heart that's like, oh, but I can't, maybe I could just pull this through and we'll just do a little bit of this every now. I shut that voice off.
Wow.
It all gets shoved to the side and we do a special that. And then I find inevitably, I throw something new into the mix January or February. So I can never finalize my year in June, July, and August, because I just know that come January or February, I'm going to want something different. Whether that's a literature class that I decide to splurge on, or, just there will be something that we add in. Maybe there's a great opera that the Salt Lake Opera is performing. And so we'll study that and prepare to go attend together. There will be something that adds a little variety to what we're doing. And then at the end of the school year, we always do a review, and we talk to our kids individually and we talk to them as a group. What did you love? What did you hate? What would you like to do different? What should we keep? And we just help them be a part of the conversation. And then I think, like any homeschool mom, I'm constantly looking, trying, researching. Is there something else that might be a good fit? Not necessarily curriculum wise, but you're just constantly searching and learning what's out there, what might work, what might not work. Should we try this? Should we not try this?
I love that. And your review, is it like kind of an informal interview, or is it just kind of some questions, or?
Yeah, it's pretty
like
informal.
Okay.
So we have a family council every week.
Nice.
And then we have individual councils with our kids every week. So it can happen in both places. Like typically, as in those individual councils, we're setting individual goals. Our kids are setting individual goals and we're supporting them in that. And it will crop up in that conversation. What is it you want to learn more about? How can we help support you in that effort? Typically, my kids have a summer focus, and it is nothing that I have anything to do with other than what do you want to learn about this summer? Could be wildflowers, could be,
Mm,
I want to, my son bought himself a blacksmith forge. I want to learn more about forging knives, like whatever it is, like what are you going to focus on this summer? That's just kind of like a built-in, if you're doing wildflowers, are we going to go hike with our flower guides and try and
that's
identify
awesome.
flowers, whatever it is,
Mhm. Wow, I love all that advice. That's great, especially like the council ideas. That's great.
Yeah, kids, I mean, at the end of the day, it's their education.
Hmm.
And so there's just always this balance between I want you to help me guide it, but at the same time, I also need to be in
Hmm.
a guide as well. So
Hmm.
part of it is we want to provide exposure. My kids don't get to pick if they do algebra,
Hmm.
but let's talk about what are ways to make it something you can deal with every day that we can
I
live through.
love that. That's great. That's wonderful. So tell me about family. Like, how supportive is your husband? Do you have family members that support you, or any thoughts on that?
I'm really lucky. My mom homeschooled my brothers off and on. So
Mm.
I'm the oldest, and then I have two baby brothers that I was 19 and 20 when they were born. And so
Mhm.
while I was off doing graduate school, she had these little baby boys at home.
Wow.
And so she went off and on, and she, like, at one point she hired a private tutor to come work with them. She'd had lots of different things. She was really opinionated about boys, especially,
Hmm.
and public school. And so when my brothers were in public school, she was pretty clear with the teachers about what was okay and what wasn't okay. And she was always very direct that I will not make my sons do homework. So if you send it home with them, just know that you have 6 to 8 hours with them every day. If they can't get it done there, I'm not enforcing that at home. I want them to be running around and doing their wild thing.
Wow.
Um,
So brave.
yeah, she was.
And how was the response to that? Was it pretty positive?
They didn't. I mean, when they were younger, they didn't really spend a ton of time in public school. Um, so it was fine. I
That's
don't even
good.
know. I don't know at what point they actually committed and stayed in longer. But
Mm.
um, but she had always said, Turia, I think you'd be a great homeschooler.
Mm.
And I just laughed because I said, oh, that's such a great thing for you to do. There's just no way I would ever do that. That's just
I
so
said the same
crazy.
words. Yeah.
In fact, when we were in Virginia after I finished school, I worked as an editor for a paper there, and one of the articles that I edited was on homeschooling.
Mm.
And I remember editing this article and reading about these lots of different situations of homeschooling in that city at the time, thinking, oh, this is just so brave. And I would just never do that ever, ever. But she and my husband were both really supportive,
That's great.
um, just from the beginning.
Wow.
So,
That's great that you have that support.
yeah.
Tell me about Come Follow Me. I'd love to know what you do to kind of incorporate it into your homeschool if you do so.
Yeah. I feel like that's always a moving target for us.
Hmm.
Um, it used to be that, so my son goes to first period, he gets back. What we were doing is I would do Come Follow Me with my kids. That had to get done before we did a reading basket. And what
Mm.
happened afterwards could be kind of flexible. Um, But during one of our individual councils
Mhm.
recently, my daughter pointed out it would be really great if our dad were involved in our Come Follow Me. So we have just recently shifted to everyone getting up earlier and doing it together as a family before he leaves for work and my son leaves for school. And so that has shifted the dynamic. There's a lot less conversation at like 6:45 in the morning than there
Mm.
is at 9 or 10 in the
Mhm.
morning. But I do think there's a different feeling when we're all together doing it. So I'm trusting in that process right now, trusting that what my daughter said was inspired. Like, it is important for my husband to be a part of that piece. Um, and so yeah, that's what we're doing right now.
Good for you for listening to her. Yep, that does sound inspired. Wow. Well, I've been really excited to touch on the global citizen thing that you said earlier, or world citizen.
Yeah.
Was it one of those? Because I know you, I don't know how much you want to go into it, have you and your kids have learned Spanish,
Yes.
right? in
Yes.
just a few years, and your Spanish is amazing.
Muchas gracias.
De nada. And so I'd love to hear how you did that. And was that through personal revelation? Like, what made you decide to do that? I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, that was a really God-guided journey.
Oh,
And it's been a really powerful witness to me that God cares and he has a plan for us. So I will do the shorter version,
okay.
but suffice it to say that I always wanted to learn Spanish, and I tried off and on, and it takes work to learn a language, and I didn't have a lot of guidance, and I didn't have a lot of stick-to-itiveness. But the year I was turning 40, which was 2019, I just felt a spiritual pinprick. And it was just like a physical sensation.
Wow.
This is the year you're learning Spanish. And we had tried things with my kids. I'd so desperately wanted for them to learn Spanish. I'd hired tutors to come in regularly when we were in Washington. And it was just always on my periphery. I remember when we moved back to Utah and there was this dual immersion program, I felt torn, like, oh, should I try and get my kids in that? Maybe that's the way that they'll learn Spanish. I feel like it's important. But yeah, I remember it was February and I decided we're going to do this. And I told my husband, we're going to start being serious about Spanish and we're going to go to Spain. We're going to work X amount of months and then I'm going to figure out a way for us to get there. And this is another story, but we had spent 3.5 years living apart. Well, I was in Utah and my husband was in Washington working. And we had just reunited and we're living in Utah together. And he had just started working at this new practice. And, we didn't have like the income to go live abroad. And I said, it's not going to cost money. I don't know how. I'm just going to figure it out.
You're awesome.
My husband is awesome because he said, okay, I trust that you're going to figure it out because you do. So it was just months of, okay, we're going to bump up the Spanish. And it was a lot of learning. How do we learn a language? How do I learn a language? How do I help my children learn a language? But when we committed, I ended up finding a volunteer exchange program where we were able to live with families in exchange for volunteer work. And so I was very specific in how I was finding these families in Spain, right?
Wow. Okay.
And I remember having this ideal timeline. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was a little bit later. And one of the families said, well, we'd prefer you come a month earlier. That's when our daughters will be home. It would be more fun for all of the kids. And I was like, oh yeah, okay, we could do that. And so I just remember doing a lot of just work constantly, whether it was trying to help build up the Spanish at home, knowing once we get there, we're going to really need Spanish. I was planning on enrolling my kids in school, so that would expose them to more Spanish. And so it provided this really great, motivation. Like, I signed up for triathlons to motivate me to train. And this was like our triathlon, our Spanish.
And it was like a family motivation too.
Right.
That's
We
so
are
cool.
going, and we are going to be in Spain needing this language. So we did that. And so it was me with my kids for most of the time alone, living with these volunteer families.
So does your husband speak Spanish or did he learn
My
with you?
husband was not with us
Okay.
for most of it.
Okay.
He was working.
Oh, yeah.
That little thing.
Yeah.
But he was living in the basement, as he reminds me, because I Airbnb'd the main floor of our home, paid for our tickets there.
You're my kind of girl.
So we had the free tickets over, and then we had, free room and board while we were there.
Wow.
My kids were in school. My
What is this
husband,
program called? Can I just ask?
yes, it's called Workaway.
Workaway. Okay.
Workaway.
I am writing that down.
Yes.
All right. Continue.
And it's basically a platform that you can look at all these profiles of different situations. You can search by schools, by volunteer organization, by family. I could specifically say,
Anywhere in the world.
yeah, anywhere in the world.
Wow.
I could specifically say I want, people who accept families. I want to live with a family. And then I could read through their profile and see, okay, are they Spanish speaker? Because there's a lot of expats in Spain. There are a lot of cool situations. Like there was one situation where it was an elderly couple
Mhm.
and the gentleman just wanted a dance partner, someone who would ballroom dance with him for
Mhm.
2 hours a day. And he had his
That
own
is so cute.
ballroom. I know, so cute, right? But they were German. And I was like,
Uh,
no, I don't need that. We're trying to,
uh-huh.
learn Spanish. So we ended up, our first family was a home, a casa rural that they had converted. It was like a 17th century farmhouse that they'd converted to Airbnbs. And it was like 400 acres, beautiful, pristine, an hour outside of Valencia.
Wow.
And we just helped turn over the rooms when guests checked out. We had our own home. It was beautiful. And then our second home was another home just like an hour outside of Benidorm. And it was a professor who, this was her country home, and she just needed
Mhm.
help in the garden and help with her dog. And she was mainly in Benidorm and Alicante teaching, but would come home on the weekends sometimes. So, and we made lifelong friends through this. But what was really interesting, if you're doing the
Mhm.
math, here we are. I think we got to Spain in August and we left. My husband came out for the last couple weeks in November, I
Mhm.
believe. And then we got out. So remember, we had to push the timeline up, and
Mhm.
I'd said like, oh, okay. We spent a couple weeks in New York to kind of transition back to
Oh, smart.
and the time zone and whatnot. And then we
Mhm.
got back to Utah, and not too much later, it was 2020. And where was the pandemic hitting really hard? Spain.
Mm.
And we would have been stuck there.
Mm. Wow.
We would have been, yeah.
Wow, it's amazing.
And it was interesting too. By then, we had these lovely lifelong friends, and they were messaging me, go get toilet paper. It's coming to the United States. Like this was
Wow.
before the news had released, like, oh, first COVID case in the United States. Go get canned
Right.
foods. Go get, they were telling me all the things to go get. And I was
Wow.
looking at my phone like, what? This is so weird. What are you talking about?
So that started
But
like in January of 2020, probably for them.
yeah.
Interesting. Wow.
Yeah, it was interesting.
So you got this prompting in February,
Yes.
and then you went in August.
Yes.
And I think I met you that summer of 2019.
Yes.
And your Spanish was already mind-blowing.
Oh,
How did you do that?
no. Oh, so here's what's really interesting. Like looking back now,
Mhm.
like it's laughable what we went to Spain, our level. It was just like I
You're like a
remember
missionary.
all of these things happening, and here I am in charge of like the lives of my children.
Uh-huh.
And like I remember going to the beach, and my youngest daughter got rolled in a wave,
Mm.
and the not the paramedics, but like the beach lifeguard people were like taking her to get her checked. And I remember I had this conversation over and over and over. And it's like one thing to be in your beautiful, quiet earbuds Spanish lesson with someone. And it's another to be on the beach with like this Jeep, really loud engine, talking to someone who has like a lisp and like a, trying to tell you really important information about your daughter's health. And I remember just like thinking, I am not equipped for this. My Spanish is not quite up to this level, but
That would be
that is
hard.
how
Plus, you were
you,
kind of in shock, probably.
right.
Yeah.
And everything was fine.
Mhm.
She was fine.
Okay.
That's all they were trying to tell me. But I remember like trying my very hardest to understand what they were saying in case she wasn't fine, but yeah.
And I know I've met maybe two of your friends who have come to stay with you.
Yes.
So you've just kind of connected, right?
And we've hosted, so we became a host family for Workaway. And so we've made lots of other friends that way of people who come. And so our volunteer work is essentially to just talk to my kids in
Oh,
Spanish
that's nice.
and hang out with them.
Wow.
So we have a few friends that have come, some regularly, and it's delightful.
And I feel like we're in the middle of your story. Like, I feel like all your kids are gonna go on Spanish speaking missions or something else is gonna happen, you
Oh,
know?
okay, so here's what happened,
Mhm,
right? I had joined this, language challenge
mhm,
as part of, motivation to keep me consistent,
mhm.
right? And I won the challenge after we got back
Wow,
from Spain,
okay.
which, at the time I was thinking, okay, I had this strong prompting. We've got to learn Spanish. You can't give up. You're going to Spain. This
Mhm,
is important for your kids. And I had felt like, okay, when you add a language,
mhm,
something else has to give, especially
mhm,
when you're learning it. Now we can maintain it pretty easily. We can read, we can talk, we can take, different, like we can take painting lessons in Spanish. We're at a different level. But when
mhm,
you're first learning, you can't do Spanish and something else. You are
mhm,
only doing the language learning. And so something else has to get moved to the side while you're doing that.
mhm.
And I remember thinking, okay, we've done what we were supposed to do. We came here, we learned a decent amount of Spanish. My girls became fluent in Valenciano because that was also spoken at the school. Check that box. Um, let's go home and add some of those other things back in. And then
Mm.
um, every time I tried to stop or put the pause button, the Lord would send another message. You're not done yet. You need to keep going.
Wow.
So one was this winning, because part of
Mm.
winning meant I won all of these free lessons in Spanish,
Wow.
and I won another challenge. So it was like, well, okay, now
One more
I
word.
gotta use that to go keep,
Yeah.
keep more, keep doing more.
Mhm,
Yeah. And so that would happen. And then every single time I would literally say, like, okay, I think we're now at the level we need to be at.
mhm.
And then something else would come up. And it was either clear feeling or a clear something. And I would tell my husband, I don't know what we're supposed to be doing with this, but we're not done yet.
Yeah.
And this is not the end of the story, but it's an interesting confirmation.
Mhm,
So just in December, this past December, I had a close friend call me and ask, "Are you on fire?" And I said, "I don't think so. I feel like I would know." And I went outside,
Mhm,
and our yard abuts with some duplexes, and one
mhm.
of the duplexes was on fire.
Mm.
And um, our ward, a single mom and a son,
Mhm,
and our ward rushed to help. There weren't members of our church, but she is from Mexico
mhm,
and speaks zero English. And I
mhm,
happen to be in the Relief Society.
mhm.
And our president said, I really want to help her, but I can't communicate with her. Now, luckily, her husband spoke Spanish and was able to communicate with her. I was able to communicate with her. And there was a lot of stuff that happened. But at the end of the day, what happened was she ended up moving in with us for a little bit of time
So
while
nice.
we helped her figure out the next step,
Mhm.
and to be able to navigate all of the things that are done in English here, like
Mhm.
applying for apartments and following up on the insurance. And, and I remember the woman in our uh, compassionate service committee
Mhm.
telling me, we all want to help her, but we can't without you. We don't speak Spanish.
Wow.
Like you are the one that, and obviously there were other people, neighbors, other ward members that do speak Spanish and were able to help. But I remember feeling in that moment, I am able to be a better helper right now because I listened to the Lord and continued. Like I am able to help them in a way that is meaningful and
Mhm.
useful. And I wouldn't have been able to do that if I had stopped or never started.
Mhm. And I bet she loved that your kids kind of probably just
Oh,
took
they
her in under.
ate her up.
That's
They
so
just,
cool.
yes, absolutely.
And so do you speak Spanish only in the house now?
No, No, we're in maintenance mode right now.
Okay.
I mean, we have
Yeah.
friends that come regularly, like I said, from
Right. And that's
Spain and
really
beyond.
helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We read and listen
That's
as
so
part of our
cool.
reading basket. We're always reading a Spanish book and talking about it. There's a lot of really cool research about reading and listening
Mhm.
with language learning. And so that's like at the bare minimum, we're always going to be reading and listening in
Wow.
Spanish. But my youngest daughter for the past few years has been begging to do French. And I'm trying to
It's
put on.
so similar, you know? It really is.
It really is. I'm
Yeah.
trying to be brave. And so tomorrow we're starting French. So
Oh, très bien. So real quick, tell me what, because I was telling my friend I was gonna interview, I was like, she doesn't just do Duolingo. So what did you use? You have a challenge. What's the challenge
oh
website
boy.
called?
So the challenge has changed and I'm
Okay.
not even sure what it's called anymore.
Okay.
It's not, boy, there were so many things I learned.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Good. I'm glad you learned it. So I would
Yes.
love to.
And so the biggest thing that I learned is finding an enjoyable way to get comprehensible input in, right? Where you're just at that
Mm.
1+
Mhm.
level and when you are at ground zero, that is challenging.
Mhm.
Fable Cottage is a great way.
Okay.
It's a membership. They do fairy tales. Some of them are animated,
Well,
some of
how
them are
fun.
not, and they come with transcripts. So you can click on any paragraph or sentence to get the actual translation, but translations aren't really as important,
Mhm.
especially in romance languages, where if you can hear it and see it, your brain will make that connection. And if you're doing
Mm.
things like stories you already know, Snow White, your kids already know the story.
Mhm. Mm.
So following along, listening a lot is good.
Listening. Okay.
Listening, and really the magic happens with reading and listening at the same time. With
Mhm.
young kids, that's not always their favorite way
Mhm.
to get it, but there are definite levels that you get to. And with Spanish, I focused on learning how to speak first because I thought, I'm going to be in Spain. I need to be able to explain to people what's
Mhm.
happening or what I need. When really I learned you need to understanding, listening, and comprehending what people are saying to you is way more important.
That's interesting. Hmm. That makes sense though.
You can always act it out, what you
Mhm.
need. But if you don't understand, if you're saying, where's the restaurant? And they're telling you where it is, and you
Mhm.
don't know what that means because they're not using the exact only phrase because you only learned one way of saying it when you're first
Mhm.
learning the language, then you're lost. It's much more important to understand.
That makes sense. My half sister, her mom's Mexican. And what you're saying is so interesting because she said she never said a word of Spanish till she was 16, but she heard it all the time. And then when she was 16, she's like, okay, fine, I'll speak Spanish. And her Spanish is so good, you
So
know?
good.
So, but she almost didn't want to, you know?
Wow.
And it just came out because her aunts, her mom, her cousins. That was such a cool story. Do you have any other kind of personal revelation in your homeschool stories you'd like to share? Anything that comes to mind?
You know, this is pretty special. I will share it because it gave me a lot of courage. Um, in the beginning, I had what I think a lot of us struggle with.
Mhm.
Am I going to do it right?
Mm.
Like there's only one way to do it,
Mhm.
right? I don't want to let my kids down. I don't want there to be gaps.
Mhm.
These are all irrational fears that you face pretty early on, that everybody has gaps. There is no one right way. Um, and learn as you go. Like if you love to learn, your kids often will follow suit. Um, but in the beginning, it felt like a big commitment, even though now I laugh at the thought of kindergarten. I mean, I don't even know that my youngest, did she have kindergarten? I don't know. But it felt like a really big deal. I was drawing a line in the sand. I was going to try to educate my child on my own. And I remember this is a part of our school year in the beginning that we started right away. which was every fall our children receive a father's blessing for that school year, and I receive a blessing. And I had started a small little PE group of other homeschool moms where we would get together regularly and just let the kids play outside somewhere. And we were having a conversation about these blessings that we wanted to get. And it was, I believe, all of our first years, maybe just two of us. But, and I remember saying what surprised me the most was how happy the Lord was with my choice. And because I didn't necessarily feel that in the 2 years of research, I didn't feel that confirmation. I just felt this, sure, hun, like a good dad, like, yeah, it's your choice. They're both good options. And they really are both good options. But the feeling that I had in that blessing was I wanted this to be your choice. And I'm so, so happy you chose it. Now, whether that was just, who knows, my son and his needs, my daughters, our individual places. Like I said, every year we're checking in. Is this still something that you want to do? Should we reevaluate? But in that moment, at that time, it just felt like a big bear hug from my Heavenly Father. I'm just so grateful for that feeling of this was a good choice for you. And what was interesting is both of the other moms at that time had a similar experience. And now not all of them chose to continue homeschooling. But I recently went back to Washington to visit some friends and reconnected with one of the moms. And, now, of course, her daughter at the time was elementary school. Now she's graduating. And she said she still says that was the best year of my life. So it was fun to see that.
That is beautiful. I just feel the spirit so strong, even you sharing that. That's so beautiful. I love that. And what a great opportunity for you to be with. I was going to comment earlier with all those homeschoolers in Washington to start off. I didn't know that there were so many homeschoolers up there. That's great.
Yeah, it's a different dynamic than it is here, but it was really neat to have the gamut, which was, I wanted to hear everyone's experience, and I got to hear it. I got to hear the people who wanted their kids learning Latin by age 2, and I got to,
Right.
interview women who were complete free schoolers, where it's just whatever my kid wants to do is going to be what they do, and everything in between. And it was really a broad spectrum. But I do think the homeschooling community here in Heber is a bit more organized, or I don't know, the community. No, I don't know how to say that better. We had good experiences in both places.
Well, that's great. I know I do feel blessed because my cousins, they live in different parts of the country and they're the only ones who homeschool, for miles. And I was like, you are so lucky. Don't forget.
It is.
So that's nice. Oh, I love everything you're sharing. Okay, moving on to my next question. What is, I don't like this word too much. What is your end game? But what do you see in the future for your family? Like missions, college, entrepreneurial. What do you see looking forward?
Good question. A lot of that will be determined by my kids' choices. But we talk about how a college education is important in our home. I know right now that's up for debate for a lot of people. Does it really have value? Does it not? Can you just learn everything on YouTube or, Harvard free educational classes? Can you get what you need without that? I think a lot of important learning happens in and outside the classroom in a university. And we are a home where we encourage and make plans. This is part of your journey. Now, we also feel like a trade school, a trade and a degree together are really good. It's good to know how to use your hands. It's good to know how to be useful. I think, a university education is useful.
Mhm.
And things like welding and electrical, electricians, plumbing, all of those are really important. Not that our kids can do all of those things, but I would say our approach right now is let's get you a trade and a degree.
That is really smart, kind of stack it
Mhm.
together. I've never heard that. I love that. And that is such a great question. I think about that too. I've been trying to do research on artificial intelligence, and I've heard things like interesting takes though. I've heard things like um that even programming and coding that you talked about earlier, they're going out because AI is replacing that, but that the things that will survive, they said something like 60% of jobs in 2030 will be completely new jobs. But replacing that will be very specialized products that humans can still make. Like the example I heard was orchids, like very beautiful orchids that you grow in your greenhouse. I thought that was so
Oh,
interesting. I need to research more about that, but I've been thinking about that a lot.
that reminds me of an article I read years ago when I was
Mhm.
researching homeschooling.
Mhm.
So I'd always thought I would send my kids to a Waldorf school.
I like
I
that philosophy.
love their
Yeah.
philosophy, and it is a good fit. We did do a full Waldorf year for my son. It was beautiful. It is not meant to be a homeschool program.
Mhm.
Waldorf is very hard for one mom to do for one kid, but it was a
Wow.
beautiful year. Um, but I had a friend send me this article that was following this trend of, all of these public schools are getting computers,
Mhm.
right? Either Microsoft or Apple.
Mhm.
They're sending these in. Kids are starting with iPads and young and moving on and on, right?
Mhm.
My son has a laptop from the high school. But the phenomenon this article was exploring was how all of the big executives for these big tech companies, many of them send their kids to Waldorf schools,
Mhm.
which I'm sure you know, require a contract that is low or zero tech.
Mhm.
And they don't even look at computers until high school.
Oh.
And so they were exploring this question of what's happening here? Why aren't you sending your kids to these um, big tech schools that you can find these specialties where all they do is technology and math and the buzzwords of what's quote unquote important right now.
Mhm.
And one of the responses I've always remembered, he said, we are making technology so easy. Anyone can use it and understand it. What we need are creative problem solvers. And that's what Waldorf produces. We need people who can think creatively, constructive problem solve. And that was I think one of the skills that will always be relevant. Now, how do you measure that? I don't know, but you
And
try
I
and
feel like
encourage
that
it.
goes for homeschool too. It
Right.
encourages that critical thinking.
I mean, it definitely depends on how you administer it,
Mhm.
right? And how you're doing it. There are times when I can see that I'm not encouraging that. I am just trying to check the box
Right.
and
Do your
get,
math.
let's just do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's an option. And it's an option in the public schools. It's an option in, private
Mhm.
schools. It really just depends on a combination of how it's presented and what that student does with the information and how it's presented. I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Sugatra Mitra.
No.
He's a researcher that did some really fascinating studies in India. And the short version is he was trying to answer the question, at what point do learners need a teacher? And how much of our education can be just self-guided and self-directed? And what he did was drop a computer in some ghetto in India, his words, um, and then had it connected to his computer in his office. And the kids there said, well, what is this thing? They'd never seen a computer before. And he said, oh, I don't know. And just left. And then he had it connected to his computer and he just left this there in the street. And fast forward, these kids teach themselves English. They teach themselves Harvard Medical School level of genetics. They just
Wow.
so much of it, he said, was just motivation and persistence. And um, so I think we still need to, he dropped the computer and we still need to provide the buffet,
Mhm.
but a lot of it is us understanding that given enough time and motivation, our kids will direct their future in really exciting ways.
That is so cool. I love everything you share. That's awesome. Well, I want to wrap it up with my last question I always ask is, what advice would you give to homeschool moms out there?
Ones that are just starting out or ones that are still doing it? Because I
Uh,
have different advice
well,
for
maybe
both.
maybe do one of each.
um, well, for homeschooling moms that are just starting,
Mhm.
and if they're coming off the public school system, I always tell them, take a long time and don't do anything formal, but just see if you're brave enough, do it for a year.
Mhm.
Just follow passions. Go to the library regularly. And by regularly, more than once a week. Let your kid pick out books that she's drawn to, and then find ways to connect that. So I asked my kids some of these questions beforehand because I was
Mm.
curious
Mhm.
what they would say. And one of the things my son said that he loves about our homeschool is that we find ways to connect what we're learning to adventures. So if we're learning about indigenous tribes, we planned a 3-week trip to Mesa Verde and Chaco Culture Center.
Oh.
We connected it to lots of different museum visits. That whole year was let's dig deep. Let's watch documentaries, but let's go, go to this festival where we're going to meet with artisan basket weavers and atlatl makers, and we're going to do these things as we're reading about them and watching them. Try that. If your kid's really into pirates, get all the books you can about pirates, read about them, um, watch documentaries on them, see what museums are doing things about them, plan a road trip around that. We did a 3-month history road trip. We spent the whole year leading up to it. And we had a big map on our wall, and everyone got to pick different things as we studied. What do you want to go see? And we pinned them all on there. Every kid got a city to plan everything we did. And then for 3 months, we were in Jamestown, we were in Williamsburg, we were at Kitty Hawk, we were in these places journaling about them. So, if you're just starting, you don't necessarily have to plan a 3-month road trip around it, but look at your life. Look at what your kid is interested in and find ways to dig deep into it. And you'd be shocked at how much just joy happens and learning, just pursuing rabbit holes, going really, really deep into things before you immediately try and replicate the public school system, which is what I see happen
Mhm.
more often than not, right? We have our desk, we have our schedule, we
Guilty.
have our, and that's
Right.
natural. That's
Yeah.
this is the way I'm used to what
Mhm.
happening. This is what I'm measuring it by. I always
Mhm.
say 3 steps back before you do any homeschooling
Mhm.
and say, how do I measure success? How do I define enough? What do I want to happen at the end of this journey? How am I going to know I've done it? Is it because my kids have their times tables memorized? Or is it because they love fill in the blank? They get excited, they can self-direct on journeys. Everyone has a different goal. But stepping back philosophically before you jump into how to do, because you don't know what you're doing if you don't know what you're doing. You have to
Mhm.
start with, what do I care about? How do I define enough? How do I define success? And then you can search for, okay, well, how do I implement that? That's for
Love that.
my never started.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I'm in a place to give people who are homeschooling advice because we're all, you know, doing it.
Mhm.
But um I feel like the conversation we all have as homeschoolers is this: same question of like, is it enough? Have we
Mhm.
done enough? Or, how do we define success? So what I like to do sometime during the summer is I just make a dream board of what our next school year will look like. And it will have pictures, it will have words, it will have phrases um, of what is my dream? What do I want it to feel like when we're doing school? What do I want us to, what does it sound like? What does it smell like? And, how can I?
And that sounds very driven by the Spirit as well, I think.
Yes,
Interesting.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. That's beautiful. I'd love to see your dream board sometime. I believe in dream boards. I have one too, and I'm just like, whoa, this happened.
Yeah,
Isn't
it
that
does.
cool?
That's totally what happened with
Yeah.
Spain. It was
Yeah.
just like, this is going to happen. We're going to make it happen. We're going to, I don't know how it's going to happen, but we're doing it. I find that I do my best schooling from a place of faith and trust, and my worst schooling from a place of fear, right?
Mhm.
Like if you're looking sideways, like, oh, their kid already knows how to do this. How come my kid doesn't know how to do this? But if you're coming from a place like centered on what matters most, and are you doing what will bring you there, then you start from a place of faith, and it feels good. It feels right.
That's beautifully said. Well, thank you so much, Turia, for coming. And muchísimas gracias.
De nada.
And I'm just going to go ahead and turn this off, but thank
Sounds
you.
good.